In its 144-year history, the Rhode Island School of Design, also known as RISD, has graduated numerous notable designers and creatives, from graphic designers Shepard Fairey and Tobias Farrar-Jones, painter Kara Walker, cartoonist Roz Chast, to Airbnb co-founders Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia.
Rosanne Somerson became president of RISD in 2015 after a distinguished teaching career there. And we speak with her about some of the common traits of RISD's most successful graduates. We also learn what she brings from her own studio practice of furniture design to her current work, how COVID has changed higher education, and about the power of a degree in the arts.
Rosanne also talks about how the overlap of disciplines leads to innovation and the importance of staying connected to your craft. We hope you learn as much from Rosanne as we did, and thanks as always for listening.
Support for Design Better comes from Gusto, who make running a small business easy. Get 3 months free at gusto.com/designbetter once you run your first payroll. Running a small business is hard work, especially all of the payroll, quarterly tax filing stuff, and HR things. I'd rather be focused on my business and my customers than dealing with the administrative duties. But Gusto makes it easy. They automated the complicated parts of running a business. With Gusto, I never miss federal or state payroll tax filings. And I love the time off requests and time tracking tools. Gusto even offers a small group health insurance option for nearly any budget. When you run into issues you need help with, their HR experts are ready to help. It's a very well-designed product, easy to use, and great emotional design that will put a smile on your face. Design Better listeners get 3 months free once they run their first payroll. Just go to gusto.com/designbetter. That's gusto.com/designbetter. I've worked with lots of search firms, both as a leader searching for new talent for my teams, and as an individual exploring new steps in my career. But I trust none more than Wirt & Company. Since 1995, Wirt & Company has been the design community's most trusted search firm, co-founded by a designer and led by a CEO who has in-house operational startup experience. Wirt & Company is guided by the principle that creative leadership is essential to business success. They've helped some of the most admired brands from early-stage startup to Fortune 500 build world-class creative teams. We're talking about companies like Airbnb, the New York Times, the Four Seasons, Notion, Figma, Google, Cartier, and Fair. Not bad. If you're looking for a partner to help you find the right person for a critical role, look no further than Wirt & Company. And if you're looking for your next design leadership role, Wirt & Company will guide you through the process as a friend and a champion throughout your journey. They take the time to get to know you, to understand what you need professionally and personally. Whether you're looking for your next role or your next team member, Wirt & Company can help you find a meaningful relationship. Visit wirtco.com to learn more and get in touch. That's WERTCO.com. Rosanne Somerson, thank you for joining us on the Design Better podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your background is interesting, this background of building furniture. You're a maker, you're a creative person, also have a long history of teaching and leading at the Rhode Island School of Design. A lot of our listeners come from a digital background, and much of what they make is very ephemeral, that they make something and it goes out into the world and many people use it, but in short order, it kind of floats away into the ether. But as a furniture maker, you're working with wood. There's a sense of permanency and legacy to the things that you make in your studio. Can you talk to us about that relationship of being a maker and what you love about your medium?
When I first was a student at RISD, which is how I first got connected to RISD, and I am shocked to say 50 years ago, so it's been a 50-year relationship, I originally was interested in photography, and I did a fairly technical kind of photography where I was working in large format and mixing all my own chemicals from things from the pharmacy. It was quite technical in the way that I approached it. And so I expected to come to RISD to be a photographer. But when I got there, I took a course in a kind of inter-semester course at a session we call winter session, where students are encouraged to try something that they've never tried before. And I took a class in the wood shop, and I found it to be incredibly humbling and difficult. And I was attracted to the challenge of that. But I think conceptually, more than just the making and the physicality of it, I had been feeling with my photography that I was spending a lot of time around chemicals and dark rooms. And I liked the sense of community that was built in a making facility. And as I got further along in the work, I became really attracted to the fact that I could make aesthetic objects that were a sort of conversation between the maker and the user. And that I liked the sense of thinking about something that would be functional in most cases and also really help to describe a way of living or a kind of life experience that wouldn't be readily available in any other way with any other kind of object specifically, except, the one that I was proposing and creating. So that interactive piece became really an instigator for me in developing a pathway into furniture design.
Could you say more about the role of community in the creative process? That's a fascinating point you just made there.
Well, in the photography area, I was very solo. Sometimes there were subjects that were people, but I did a lot of work shooting outdoors and then spent lots of hours in the darkroom. And there were days when I never saw light. I was just in there all day. So to go into a place where there were sounds and smells and people helping each other, there are big boards, there are glue ups with multiple clamps where, you wish you had 10 hands. And so you find colleagues who will help you, and a lot of head scratching and looking at blank pieces of wood or drawings or models because, everyone was creating something that had never been made before. It wasn't as if we were doing reproductions, so we were testing each other's chairs to see what was comfortable for different sizes and body types. And there was a great sense of independence in the philosophical or conceptual side, but a great sense of community in the making and the decision making to a certain degree, and also the reception and how an object was reading. We would ask each other, does this look like X to you? Or what do you see? Or, so there was a lot of feedback built into the design process because these were functional objects for people other than ourselves. And that built a sense of community, which quite honestly continued well into my professional career. And I still have a group of about 15 or 20 really close colleagues that I've known for decades who are all furniture designer makers. And so that community only expanded in a really wonderful personal way.
Rosanne, you're obviously the president of RISD, which is known for its design program, but that's not the only creative discipline that's well known there. There's painting and other forms of art. And Aaron has a painting background. I have actually a background in photography. And we're curious, what have you learned in the course of both your furniture career, but also in your leadership career, of what we can take away from creative disciplines that might be very different from our area of expertise?
At RISD, increasingly, we still believe in an educational model that centers through a discipline, but increasingly opens beyond that discipline so that the distinctions are becoming much less clear. And when I go to the graduate exhibits, for example, and the master's end of year shows, I often look at the work first and try and figure out what department the student is from, and then look at the label, and I'm, amazed because I would have never expected that. So I think things have really opened up, but we've also added graduate programs in liberal arts areas and global arts and cultures, looking at new canons and new histories of art and design, as well as sustainability principles and digital media of various sorts. Actually, our newest degree is a collaborative graduate degree with Brown University's engineering department. And it's with engineering and design, which we think has a great deal of opportunity moving forward. But I think really the crux of what you're asking is something else, which is that artists and designers learn a number of things that I don't think are as readily learned in other educational models. They learn a way of perceiving and experiencing that leaves the question open much longer than other kinds of education. And what happens in that open-ended question period is that the uncertainty of what one is looking for allows new kinds of surprises and innovations to take place. So I am very aware of the fact that an art and design education educates individuals to be ready to take on anything. They know how to take an idea, how to bubble it out for a really long time, how to prototype it, how to draw it, how to model it on a computer, and iteratively go back and forth so that it's not a linear process of thinking, but it's a very circuitous, in a way, process where they're still keeping open and questioning all along the way. And so the results are things that matter, things that haven't existed before, things that haven't been conceived of before. And that form of thinking and perceiving and receiving is something that we find is applicable to many fields, even beyond outside art and design. So, for example, RISD alumni have an affinity group of RISD lawyers. They're RISD folks that have gone to RISD and then gone on to law school. And when I speak to those lawyers, they say that the strategic development of a case, it comes more from their RISD education than their law education. And I hear that from many different fields. I would also add that at this particular point in time, where we've all been through the most radically changed year of our lives, thrust upon us, we have all questioned everything. How we live, how we socialize, how we get our groceries, how we do just normal day-to-day things, how we work, how we connect. And the kind of nimble thinking and open-endedness that our students are learning and our alumni know has allowed them to thrive in ways that I don't think all the population has had the opportunity to experience. They have been very creative in their responses to this extraordinarily unusual time. There are other parts of that have been exposed about inequities and differences that have really risen to the surface. And again, designers, I think, are more tuned into that, to thinking about acknowledging the fact that a lot of inequity became visible that was unknown before. And that's now filtering back into their practice and into the things they care about and the things they want to do in the future. So it's a long answer, really, to a simple question, but I think it's about a way of thinking and being. And I've always defined a good education as learning things that change who you are so that you own transferable skills that can take you through lots of challenging opportunities with the confidence of a process that will get you through to the other side in a way that is your own.
I hear a lot of truth in what you've just said. And as Eli alluded to, I got an MFA in painting. And one of my professors, I remember him saying to me all the time, Stan Whitney, I went to Tyler School of Art, didn't go to RISD, unfortunately. But he used to say to me, you've got a creative education, you can do anything now. So I want to just kind of dig into a little bit more of what you said. You mentioned, some RISD graduates go on to be lawyers, but are there other types of disciplines where you see that creative thinking, storytelling that's inherent in creative thinking, creating metaphor, et cetera, where you see a creative education manifesting in ways that you find just unexpected?
Well, there's so many examples of our alumni going on to do things that are unexpected. I mean, the sort of classic example is Airbnb, which both Joe and Brian comment frequently that their design education helped them to think about something that hadn't existed in the same way or at all, really. They created a whole new industry. And, their story came out of necessity. They couldn't pay the rent. There was a big design conference in town. There were no rooms left. And they had an air mattress in their closet. And they thought, well, what if we rented out a space on our living room floor? And that's how it became Airbnb, because the first one was an air mattress. But that form of thinking is an example of just having the will to get beyond a challenge. And, we have students designing for NASA. We have students who are designing every kind of product and practicing every kind of work of art that you can imagine, but they're also helping to work with scientists. They're helping to work with writers. Right now at RISD, there's a huge emphasis on really facing racial injustices. And we have students working on different systems for thinking about juvenile incarceration and for things that connect to big social problems, big environmental problems. We have extended the notion of storytelling to another kind of communication. So, for example, students in our interior architecture department created a virtual reality game where you could wear a headset and with certain sensors go through the city of Newport, which is a coastal city, and see what different places would look like with sea rise, so that they could then begin to design solutions to think about how to mitigate the inevitable changes that will happen from climate change. So, that's merging their interior architecture education with game design and visual thinking, and also the communication to other entities that might not be connected to the arts and design, but will understand something viscerally through that experience and then come up with urban planning, coastal planning, other kinds of planning to really get ahead of a problem that is daunting. I've often said that when two bodies of knowledge come together, the space and the overlap is where innovation happens. And more other disciplines, other forms of practice, other professions are recognizing the role of design, and not just designers, artists as well, for their ability to think differently, to think creatively, to, people say think outside of the box or design thinking. I mean, I think those are sort of cliches for something much deeper, but people are beginning to recognize these competencies as essential parts of moving societies forward. And so they come to RISD alumni or our current students for interns with opportunities to ingratiate their abilities or to implement their abilities into all different kinds of fields and professions. We have people that come to our portfolio review days from, venture capital, from real estate, from insurance companies, from medical supply producers. We've had students working with physicians on thinking about communication of different diagnostic paths to patients. The applications of what our students are capable of is expanding every year.
Rosanne, you touched on a little bit some of the challenges that students faced during this time of COVID and also the creative way in which they've responded. And I experienced similar things teaching this past year. I'm curious, what do you see ahead of us as, COVID retreats and things come back somewhat to normal? What are we going to take away from the experience, and how is this going to change higher education?
Well, if someone had told me a year and a half ago that we could convert so many classes that are studio-based, hands-on, working with materials into a hybrid model and still produce amazing work and learning, I would have been skeptical. I would have been skeptical not that it's possible, but that faculty would want to do that. And our faculty were extraordinary. They pivoted so quickly and produced new syllabi and new ways of teaching their classes. I mean, we rebuilt over 800 classes in late spring and over the summer, and we discovered a lot of really cool stuff. So some of it had to do with the different learning styles of different students. Some of it had to do with the fact that we could bring in guest critics and even studio visits from across the globe that typically wouldn't have the opportunity to interact with our students. We could do collaborations with other sponsors and schools and partners that we never could have done before in the same way. And we could develop ways for people to study across the globe. So there are great takeaways that we've learned from this experience that will continue forward. There's just no way not to utilize some of what we've learned. Our continuing education programs, which, are part of our mission, is to educate the public as well as our degree granting students. We pretty much had a regional program with, some international or some travel opportunities, but basically the courses were here on campus or in the region, we had students from almost every state in America and across the globe. We had international students taking our continuing education classes. And in our museum, the exposure to our collections, which fortunately had been digitized prior, were used all over the world in teaching. And one of our museum educators told me a story that they run programs for kids on the weekends. And typically the kids come into the museum, they use the museum as a source of inspiration, and then they have a room where they create their own things. And there was a student collaborating, a young kid collaborating with a grandparent who lived in California on a project, and the student, lived here. So all these new kinds of learning opportunities that came about purely from necessity. We're in the process now. We have an academic task force group that's looking at these learning outcomes to think, what are the takeaways that we should implement to really not just change the classroom experience here, but think about how we educate people across the globe.
Rosanne, one of the greatest things about teaching, in my experience, is that you get to meet a lot of different people and you develop relationships with so many different students, and you get to see their perspective of the world in lots of different ways. And as part of that, you see different career trajectories too, and you start to recognize that there are lots of successful students who you cross paths with, but they have different traits that lead to that success. You mentioned Joe Gebbia and Brian Chesky. Brian was on the show a while back, and he's an amazing person. Not only is he a really smart person, but he's just a very generous person individually. So I wondered if you could speak to some of the traits that you've seen of your most successful grads who you've worked with directly.
Wow. Well, I've taught so many students over the years and connected with others who I didn't even teach, through my other academic roles. And it's not always the most talented students who succeed, although, talent, however one wants to define that, is a part of it. It's this necessity to see your ideas out in the world or to see your impact out in the world that drives individuals who become successful. And they have to have a great toolbox to work from because otherwise it will fall flat. But I just was on a Zoom event last night with 5 new graduate students who are all part of a new program that I'm really proud of at RISD that's called the Society of Presidential Fellows. And we're creating fully funded graduate degrees for a number of students who probably never would have been able to attend RISD otherwise. And I was checking in with the 5. We're going to have 17 next year. We have 5 in the first cohort this year. And they're extraordinary individuals. And they were showing their work and talking about what they're thinking about as they develop thesis ideas, et cetera. And what really struck me was that every single one of them had studied something entirely different, in some cases not even related, in their undergraduate degrees. And they came to a graduate program fully ready to take that body of knowledge and apply it to a completely different set of circumstances. And that flexibility, I have the complete confidence, will serve them throughout their professional lives because I see in our alumni individuals who have done that. The interior designers who become shoe designers and architects who become graphic designers and everyone who become teachers, some for children, some for disabled individuals or individuals differently abled, just all kinds of applications that draw from the strength of their education, but are applicable to what doorways open in one's life or what doorways you build and then open yourself. I think really it's just that sense of motivation, that sense of having to do something, having to see something through. One of the things that was interesting was we recently ran an alumni survey, and we found that 45% of the alumni who responded to the survey had started their own either nonprofit or entity or business. And 45% is really high. One of the individuals involved in giving the survey had worked prior at MIT and at Harvard, both where they'd done a similar survey, and the numbers at RISD were far higher. which shows a really entrepreneurial kind of spirit. And I think that entrepreneurial spirit comes out of the fact that our students want to put voice out in the world. You talked about storytelling. I think it's also the fact that increasingly, as I've seen students over many decades, they're far less interested in becoming the kind of star artist or star designer, and they're much more interested in seeing how they can apply their talents and their abilities to making difference in the world, to making positive impact. So I think that desire coupled with that really solid toolbox is just a winning combination. One of the other things I guess I would add to that is that part of the educational process, as you well know, in an art and design school is the process of critique. And it's the process of getting feedback, getting critical feedback, and learning how to use that as a tool rather than as a defeat. And so our students are really well versed at both hearing the critique, both good and negative, but also refining their ability to describe their intentions, describe what they were after in the work so that people know how to respond to what they see in front of them. And those are traits that are really valuable in the outside world, to be able to present an idea, defend an idea, and tweak an idea, and then re-present the idea. That sort of set of skills is useful in so many different careers or fields.
That's a very good point. That's one thing that we see with a lot of colleagues who we've worked with in various disciplines. And again, drawing upon experience in painting school, I heard professors say often that being creative, creating something, bringing it to life and putting it in front of people is inherently risky. And the idea of taking that risk of making a thing, putting it in front of people and getting feedback, it forces you to develop resiliency and be comfortable with risk.
Absolutely. And those are traits that have really proven to be necessary during this last year that we've all been through. There are some studies that show that creative individuals, when they're taking risks, have certain sort of almost like serotonin effects, chemical effects. There are some people that say that people who have to be involved in creative professions are kind of addicted to that feeling of that creative rush, that it's a kind of adrenaline that comes when you're really in a process. It's very hard to get other way. I mean, athletes talk about the similar traits, musicians certainly do. But I think, one of the interesting studies that was done some years ago showed that when they analyzed a group of scientists and they looked at which scientists had merely succeeded and which had gotten Nobel Prizes, they found that almost to a fault, every single one of the scientists who were the prize winners had had either an artistic or a music practice growing up. And so there's this sense of perseverance that comes from risk-taking and applying oneself to a creative endeavor that develops other parts of the mind in ways that can be very fruitful, even if the end result is not art or music or design.
Support for Design Better comes from Uplift Desk, who help you work better and live healthier. Eli and I log a lot of hours at our desks, which can be detrimental to one's health if you're not paying attention to ergonomics. Uplift Desk offer high-quality, well-designed desks, chairs, and accessories to help you build an ergonomic workspace for home or work. Eli recently got a standing desk, and I got a human-scale Freedom chair. I've been dreaming about this chair for a long time, and I finally got one. I've already noticed a big change in my posture with this chair, and my body thanks me for it. Eli is logging a lot more hours standing than sitting these days, and he can make quick transitions with the flip of a switch. We love Uplift Desk, and we know that you will too. Design Better listeners can get a special deal by visiting upliftdesk.com and use the code DesignBetter at checkout for 5% off your order. You'll get free shipping, free returns, and an industry-leading 15-year warranty. Go to upliftdesk.com, use code DesignBetter, and get 5% off. Design a better workspace with Uplift Desk. Support for Design Better comes from Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery. Design Better listeners can save 50% on their order at factormeals.com/designbetter50. Use the code DesignBetter50. You know what happens at my house when things get really busy? In the evenings, we turn to takeout, which can be expensive and it's not very good for our health. Lately, we're making a better choice at crunch time. We turn to Factor for chef-created, dietitian-approved meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes. We like the flexibility of Factor too. You can change your order up every week with plans from 4 to 18 meals per week, or you can pause or reschedule your deliveries at any time. The meals are so tasty. My wife and I are huge fans, and I like their smoothies too, which I find are perfect for a quick, healthy breakfast. Factor can help you eat well and feel good while focusing on your career and your family. Head to factormeals.com/designbetter50 and use the code designbetter50 to get 50% off your order. That's code designbetter50 at factormeals.com/designbetter50 to get half off your order. Support for Design Better comes from Gusto, who make running a small business easy. Get 3 months free at gusto.com/designbetter once you run your first payroll. Running a small business is hard work, especially all of the payroll, quarterly tax filing stuff, and HR things. I'd rather be focused on my business and my customers than dealing with the administrative duties. But Gusto makes it easy. They automate the complicated parts of running a business. With Gusto, I never miss federal or state payroll tax filings, and I love the time off requests and time tracking tools. Gusto even offers a small group health insurance option for nearly any budget. When you run into issues you need help with, their HR experts are ready to help. It's a very well-designed product, easy to use, and great emotional design that will put a smile on your face. Design Better listeners get 3 months free once they run their first payroll. Just go to gusto.com/designbetter. That's gusto.com/designbetter.
So, Rosanne, just wanted to go back to the topic of critique for a minute. And as an undergrad going through a design program, I had a wonderful professor named Matt Kahn, who was just, beyond his capabilities as a designer, just a wonderful critic. At the same time, a pretty harsh critic. And I think in my own teaching practice, I kind of struggle sometimes with that balance of, critique and like positive energy and encouragement. And we occasionally run these design leadership conferences, and a lot of design leaders speak to this fact of having employees or younger employees who really kind of face critique in a very emotional way. And maybe some of these folks haven't gone through an art school to kind of get used to that. But I'm wondering if you have any sort of tactics or tips for people in critiquing work, professional work or student work, in such a way that it's more valuable and kind of builds resilience in the student or employee.
Yeah, I mean, we could do almost a whole interview just on critique because it's such an important and big topic. But I would say in a sort of summary that the most important thing is that it's not about the critic. It's about the student and the work that's being critiqued. And, I've been to thousands of critiques and, there are many of them where the critic is talking about themselves or talking about what they think is good. That's not the point of a critique. I think it's often appropriate to bring in examples and say, are you aware of this book or this artist or this project or this event? So that you're opening up the thinking of the individual. But critique, to be successful, has to really be generous, and it has to be about the work and the individual whose work is being reviewed. One of the things that we've done over time, or at least when I was still running critiques, is to really have the students open the critique with a kind of statement about how they wanted us to look at the work and what they were interested in. So that if a student was interested in a certain conceptual frame, they didn't want to hear about whether the joints were fitting well. That was not how they wanted to use their time. They wanted to hear, about the conceptual frame. So having the students learn how to guide the conversation, I think, is a really important thing rather than imposing one's ideas on a situation. And also, I think as we've become much more in tune to racial inequities and justice inequities, it's really important to understand the different kinds of privilege experience that critics bring to a question and to be ultra aware that that may not be an appropriate way to talk about one's work. I have been to crits, again, where the critic has superimposed a certain aesthetic, which comes out of a tradition that may be of no interest to that student whatsoever, talking about it as if it's preferable to the work that the student is doing aesthetically. And that's just an uninformed way, in my opinion, to be a critic. It's really about drawing out the student's intention and where the student wants to get guidance and feedback, not where the critic is telling a student how to live up to a standard that belongs to the critic.
As we look toward a future in which more and more jobs are automated and artificial intelligence and machine learning take many opportunities away in various fields, what do you think about the future of the kind of power of a degree in the arts? And are there not only things that art itself can bring, but collaboration between art and artificial intelligence, or kind of forward thinking potential ways of looking at this problem?
Yeah, well, I think there are sort of two ways of answering that. One is that art education is changing to include all of those digital disciplines, and more and more of our students are working with artificial intelligence or augmented intelligence and different kinds of media, whether they're virtual or augmented realities or robotics. I mean, they're inventing things. Our students in the first year program are learning to code. And, we look at code as another tool in the toolbox, like charcoal or, drawing. And so they're not just using software, but they're writing their own programs to make drawings and three-dimensional objects and designs. And also, code in itself is a beautiful language, or can be a beautiful language. So the way that education is changing rapidly to include a lot of the digital as inherent into practice in art and design. But beyond that, in the sense of collaboration, absolutely. I mean, I know a lot of computer scientists, and many of them are extremely creative, but not all of them are. And this is partly why we created this design engineering degree, because we felt like designers could really benefit from understanding some of the opportunities of engineering and vice versa, that we could help take two different ways of thinking and put them together to be something hopefully bigger than the sum of the parts, and that some of the big challenges that we face require those different ways of thinking to solve them. So I do believe that art and design education will be more relevant than ever. I also believe that it will change dramatically to use the tools of the current moment and the future, as artists always have. We look back at cave paintings and think about the materials that artists used to produce those and the relevance of those as educational tools for other members of the community. And, you can expand that all the way forward to say, well, what are the tools that we have available to us now to achieve the same human impetus, which is about exploration, communication, and sharing stories and education with others, solutions to problems, archiving and documenting in ways that help create a different kind of future. These are all the things that fascinate artists and designers and always will.
Every artist and designer I know has a really thoughtful living space. They live in a space that inspires creativity, that embodies their life experience. There are some people who go through life and their space is it's literally a space. It's like, over here is where I do this thing and over here is where I do that, but there's no philosophy of living embodied in that space. How do you think about that personally? I mean, one amazing thing about being president of RISD is you probably have a nice collection of art because you get exposed to a lot of great art every day, all day. But how do you think about creating a living space that enables quality living?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, I'm laughing inside because I'm thinking about when I started out as an artist and my artist friends, and, we were living on cardboard boxes and,
Right, right.
I wouldn't necessarily call our living spaces beautiful. I would call them really inventive.
Yes.
But in the president's house at RISD, I created a program. The president's house was pretty much unfurnished when I moved in and it's pretty empty. So I created a program of highlighting alumni and faculty and some student work. So the whole house is full of art made by RISD folks, but it's on loan. And we've actually sold work to other people from the house or gotten people into collections or whatever. And then there's a library that's full of artists, RISD authors, scholars, illustrators, catalogs of exhibitions, etc. So we've used the physical space to really showcase other aspects of RISD and the breadth of the RISD community. I do think that, again, this last year has forced many of us to face a lot of questions about how we live and how we share space. A lot of people found themselves home together that hadn't typically been home together. And so there are a lot of people thinking about what constitutes a home, or where you work, or where you connect, or where you eat or cook or whatever, because we've done a lot more of that than we ever probably have in the last decade or so, or whatever time frame. I am really aware of, again, the issues of inequities and the differences that different people have to face, and the number of artists and designers who make every sacrifice to start a business or to continue to make their work. And, that's sort of one part of the realm. And then there are others who have the good fortune to really put a lot of effort into extraordinarily beautiful and personal spaces. And, a number of the students that I taught in furniture design have gone on to have big design firms that do other kinds of design than just furniture. So they're doing interiors, they're doing architecture, they're doing set design, they're doing fashion design, they're doing display design. And seeing what they can do when they have the ability to really push the edges is astounding. The sense of playfulness or aesthetic beauty or material sensitivity or spatial sensitivity, the experience of creating experience is so wonderful when it's done well. I think for many artists and designers, they can't be in a space, if they have the ability to affect it, that doesn't appeal to a very well-honed aesthetic sensibility. I remember once, years ago, when I was much younger in my career, being in a waiting room, and there were two sets of chairs facing one another. And two of them were really beautiful chairs, and two of them, the ones across from them, were really uncomfortable chairs. And I was trying to decide if I should sit in the beautiful chairs and look at the uncomfortable ones, or vice versa. And I had to sit in these incredibly uncomfortable chairs because it was more important to me to look at these beautiful objects while I was waiting than to be comfortable. That for me was a better kind of comfort. I think that's a kind of illness that comes out of a creative education.
I totally identify with that. It is an affliction. You've talked a bit about the extensive equity thinking that you've done at RISD and the accomplishments that you and your colleagues have brought about. Are there lessons that could be extrapolated to the wider world of how you've thought about equity, how you've brought more inclusion to your programs, to the educational experience, and how we who are not in an educational environment might learn from that and bring that to our own work?
First of all, it's really important to say that while I did lead some of this work and initiated some of it at RISD, it is not my work alone. In fact, the leading voices are those who have lived experiences that could inform all of us. So the students have been very activist in their expectation that RISD is a place where they don't have to experience racism, where they don't have to experience otherness. And we have a very broad-based community. And, the issues of equity are complex because they're intersectional issues. People don't just identify as one thing. There are multiple forms of identity that each has different human experiences or encounters or challenges. So we've really learned a great deal from the students and from the faculty. As we've increased the diversity among the faculty, we've been able to change the curriculum and the pedagogy, which has to be at the core of a commitment to anti-racism. We were very fortunate to be able to receive a generous donation to create a cluster hire of 10 new faculty in what we call a race in art and design cluster hire, all who bring expertise in their practice directly related to race in art and design or the areas of scholarship that we teach in our liberal arts. And that will be transformative. In the time that I've been president, we've been able to hire 40% of the faculty new, and a lot of those faculty are more diverse. But this notion of this cluster hire is going to just accelerate how RISD can advance around these areas of absolute significance in moving art and design forward. I think one of the other things to recognize is that there are a lot of assumptions made about excellence, which has become almost a keyword for forms of prejudice. There are people that say, well, of course I would hire diverse individuals, but they're just not out there, which is not true. If someone feels that, they're not using the right search processes or the right recruiting processes, because RISD in its commitment has brought in extraordinary people since we've made this institutional commitment. And our student body this fall will be 47% diverse. So that's huge progress over a number of years. But I think the biggest takeaway perhaps is learning to listen, to recognize other people's lived experiences, and to make that a part of the hierarchy, to really think about the decisions that are made and who is informing decisions and who is involved, who's at the table. You know, I was involved in an exhibition in Philadelphia a couple of years ago that was about women furniture designers, and it was called Making a Seat at the Table. And of course, in the furniture realm, you know, that has a different kind of pun. But, you know, it's like, how is the table even made? And who decides how many chairs are there and who gets to sit in them and how are the decisions made? All of these questions are questions that will have an impact on equity in any kind of institution. So as a person who comes from privilege, as a white person who has had a lot of opportunity, I have to listen to folks that have had really different lived experiences and let those voices lead decisions, because otherwise they're irrelevant, they're imposed, and they're inappropriate.
Rosanne, what's inspiring you right now? Are there any books, podcasts, art? What are you finding inspiration in?
Honestly, I mean, it will sound corny, but it really is the work I'm seeing students doing. It's so powerful. The next generation of creative leaders are going to be unbelievable. They're bringing such worldliness and difference and capability into the world. So I am totally inspired by our students and the challenging work that they're doing that's using technology in new ways, that's asking new questions and presenting beautiful alternative ways of thinking about being in the world. On a personal note, I mean, I'm reading all the time and listening to things all the time, but it's almost too many to say. But on a personal note, I just became a grandparent for the first time. And there's just something unbelievably inspiring looking at a new life, you know, a day old, and thinking about helping to make sure that the world that that young person grows up in will be a better place than it is now, and thinking about how to make sure that I do my part to see that happen.
Rosanne Somerson, thanks so much for being on the Design Better podcast.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.